Alright, so this is what I'm going to be building for you today. It's a dust cart all-in-one with dust collection system with the Dustopper, Ridgid shop vac. I got this for budget and this one. Let's go. Alright, as I get stuff set up, I like to give credit where credit is due. I think the earliest I saw this style of dust collection cart on YouTube was from a channel called John Builds It, so I'll link to his video right here. And then I think I was just able to bring the cost down just a little bit, as well as added one additional feature, which you'll see later in the video. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is just set the shop vac on top of the plywood and make my rough cuts to get the project started. I'm going to add about 4 inches to each of my cuts, which will give me a 2-inch border all the way around to work with. So I bought a 4-foot by 8-foot sheet of CDX plywood, 1/2 inch. This stuff is relatively cheap compared to other higher grade plywoods. And I think this is one of the places where I save a little bit of money. You'll see at the end the dust cart works great. So 1/2 inch was plenty strong, and just for my purposes 3/4 inch wasn't necessary. I bought a full sheet because I have another project planned already, but I typically can count on using plywood for something else down the road. However, you can buy a 2-foot by 2-foot section of this for about $10 at your local home improvement store, and that'll be just fine. Next, I lay out all the PVC fittings on the table. I have a 10-foot section of 1.5 inch PVC pipe, 4 2-inch couplings, 4 2-inch to 1.5 inch reducers, as well as 4 1.5 inch caps. And there's a couple key things here. If you buy the long couplings, there's some that are shorter and some that are more about like 3.5 inches long. If you buy the long ones, that will fit completely into the casters on the shop vac. And finding the reducers that go straight from a 2-inch coupling to 1.5 inch pipe will keep you from having to buy even a small section of 2-inch pipe to connect them. I went ahead and glued the reducers to the couplings to just get that out of the way. I'm using the OD 2-part primer and PVC cement. Just use the primer. Come on. If you haven't glued PVC together before, when the cement reacts, it creates heat that's going to want to push the two pieces apart. So the proper way to do it is to put them together, give a 1/4 turn, and then hold it compressed for about 30 seconds to get a nice tight bond. I used a flexible tape measure that I had to measure the circumference right underneath the lip of the bucket. See if you see that. And this is the first time I've used this high school math in a long time. Kind of made me laugh. I still looked it up on Google for a radius calculator as well, just to double check. So I used the trick of measuring from the 2 diagonals to find the center point of the square. I don't know if the square actually has to be perfect to find the exact center, but it seemed to do a good enough job for me. I drove a screw into the center point, and after finding the right size wrench, used that to draw a circle. You can see I was pretty happy with myself with how it turned out. After measuring to double check the radius of the circle, I went ahead and drilled a hole to fit my jigsaw in and then cut the circle out. See how we did it. So after cutting the hole and doing a test fit with the bucket, I found the bucket was a little snug. I tried sanding it with my random orbital sander, but I couldn't really get to the curve of the circle very well. So I ended up sanding the rest of it by hand with some 60 grit sandpaper that I had. But this took quite a while and a lot of effort. So if anybody has a better idea, you can let me know in the comments. I was thinking about one of those spindle sander attachments for a drill. That might work. Or I guess a benchtop spindle sander might be in my future. We'll see. Let me know what you guys think. All right. So my method of measuring what length PVC to cut was kind of squirrely. I just put one in the caster and held up the bucket to kind of measure what height I needed to cut it at. This ended up costing me because my first 3 pieces were all a little long. I was rough cutting them, which left my last piece a little short, which meant I had to find another 1.5 inch coupling and a short section of 1.5 inch PVC pipe to add on top. So this is something you can take away from this, or that I would do differently. I would have just taken that 10-foot section and cut it into 4 equal lengths of 2.5 feet. And for my shop vac, that would have been just fine. If you're using a similar size shop vac or a similar one, you could probably get away with doing the same thing. I'll have links in the description below so you can check dimensions or anything you want to look at. Learn my lesson here to not clamp both sides because the saw combined. And that's a wrap for tonight. See you tomorrow. And you'll see that mistake I made here. Next, I cut all the PVC sections to final length. I just lay the bore on top, generally in the center, eyeballing it to mark circles where the PVC pipes meet up to the bottom of the board. Then I attach the PVC caps to the bottom of the board by drilling some holes and running a bolt through there with some nuts and washers. I'm just going to leave the caps attached to the PVC pipe with a friction fit in case I ever want to remove it. Solid! Next, I cut the board to final size, leaving a 2-inch border from each of the bolts on all sides. I rounded the corners of the board using an old paint can and my jigsaw. Here I go through and cut the holes for the attachments to fit. I was having trouble getting the metal handles off the bucket, so I just went at it with an angle grinder. This is definitely not OSHA approved, and the metal got so hot it actually just melted the plastic and came out through the bottom. I was able to make sure it didn't melt the inner rim of the bucket, so it turned out alright. You can leave the handle on there if you want. I just did a quick sand to 80 or 120 grit. It's a shop project. Boom. Boom. This was an exciting moment, finally getting to put the Dustopper on the top of the bucket. I will say I probably got lucky finding this on clearance at Home Depot, but I also found one on Facebook Marketplace for like $15 after just poking around for a couple weeks. I'll be using that one for dedicated miter saw dust collection at some point. But what has totally worked for me in keeping costs down is buying all of my tools, or almost all of them, either lightly used or gently used on Facebook Marketplace, OfferUp, Craigslist, wherever I can find them. So that's awesome. It's saved me a lot of money as I keep buying tools. Right on. I did need to buy one more right angle attachment, and I just used the same one that John Builds It and Field Treasure Designs used. Links in the description below. This should come right off, and it does, and yes! Testing it out, looks pretty good. Not bad. Sorry for the shoddy camera work, but it seems to be doing a good job of keeping the dust out of the shop vac and fogging the filter. So there you have it, y'all. This is the all-in-one dust collection cart with the Cyclone, Dustopper Cyclone, Ridgid shop vac, and this is right around... I'll pause my former self right here for a minute. Right around $120. $40 for the shop vac, $5 or $6 for the bucket, $12 for the Dustopper, $10 estimated cost for a 2x2 sheet of CDX plywood, $12 for the PVC pipe, about $24 for all the fittings. They're about $1.50 to like $2.75 each, plus the right angle attachment and a few bolts, nuts, and washers. And this is where you could stop if you wanted to stay right at $120, and it totally works. Everything would be just fine. That'll do it. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple features just because it's how I want it to be. One of them is just painting it. I'm using a matte black, this Krylon Fusion paint that I get from Lowe's. I like it because it's what I used on my DIY solar pipe shower. link up here in the corner if you want to see how I made that. And that thing has been through the ringer and the paint has still held up. So that's what I use now to paint PVC. And I just start by wiping it down with some acetone. I got this tip from the Bob Vila website and it's worked well for me in the past. For transparency, this is out of order a little bit chronologically. I actually was going to throw away the little brush attachment from my right angle, but then I saw somebody using it on a YouTube video when they were actually dusting off a work project. And I realized I could just glue together 3 scraps of the 1/2 inch plywood together and use a hole saw to cut a holder for the brush attachment. I glued and screwed it on and came back and painted it later. And the real upgrade is adding an automatic switch to one of the PVC pipes. I plan on ultimately using it to connect to a table saw or other tools whenever I have the shop built out. And having this feature I think will make my workflow just that much more seamless. Used some double-sided VHB tape that I had lying around to mount it to the PVC pipe first, then secured it with a couple screws. Alright, test it out, see if it works. It's like magic, let's go! So there you go, really happy with it. Painted matte black, you got the Cyclone separator as well as the shop vac, automatic switch. Really fired up to be able to use this now. Thanks for following along and subscribe if you want to see more content.